My name is Amy Goering, and I am the art instructor at Central Christian College of Kansas. And today I'm really happy to share with you about how I start an acrylic painting from start to finish, or at least I hope to get to finish during this time. So my students, when they come into class, they begin starting their work in black and white paints only before we jump into color. And one of the very first projects that they have in black and white is doing a landscape painting in black and white, and they're studying basically value relationships and form and trying to make an image that is on a 2D surface appear to be 3D. So when they work, they will put together something kind of like this. So this is a black and white painting of a landscape, and this is what would be considered like a value study of a scene. And then later they will do the same scene in color. So today, for my little demonstration, I'm going to be painting the image that I just showed you, but in color. So it's going to be working from this photograph. And notice over here to my side, the painting over here is actually an oil painting. It's not quite finished. It's really close to completion, but it's not quite done. And this photograph is actually a portion of this larger scene right here. So I'm going to be zeroing in kind of on the stream and a little bit of the mountain area for my painting. I'd like to share with you a little bit about my materials that I have sitting out here. So this easel, you may not be able to see quite all of it in the camera. This is a homemade easel. It folds up all really nicely, and it all fits inside a backpack. So if I go hiking and I want to bring my paints with me and take that all along and go painting, which is what I did actually when I took these source images for these paintings. Also, I have here just a few paintbrushes, my palette knife, paper towels, a bucket of water over here, trash can on the floor, and this is my palette. So this actually lifts off really nice. These are oil paints on here right now. And then I have an assortment of my supplies underneath. Since I won't be working in oil today, I'm going to set this aside and I'm going to grab another palette in order to work in acrylic. We're ready to begin. So you will notice I have a number of different paints on my palette. I have titanium white, it's the first, yellow ochre, cadmium yellow, cadmium red, alizarin crimson, and ultramarine blue. And with this assortment, I can surprisingly mix just about any color on the rainbow. And so I purposefully start off my students with a very limited palette to not overwhelm them with too many colors, and surprise them with basically how much you can mix with just this. Acrylics dry very quickly, opposed to oils. So the oils that I have on my palette right now, like those big piles of paint that you saw earlier, those have been there a couple weeks, and they will probably still be wet for a couple more weeks. They do not dry fast at all, but this does, and it'll work great for this demonstration. So the very first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to mix up just an easy mid-tone for doing the drawing. And students are welcome to draw out their painting first with pencil if they would like, but for me, I just usually will work with my paints. And this color is nothing too special, but it's just kind of a good mid-tone color that I can sketch in what it is I'm going to paint. So the very first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to establish where my horizon line is. And I'm going to use this top third-ish portion of the canvas. It's actually a little bit between the halfway and third mark. Just kind of using a little bit of that rule of thirds, where you always want to put your horizon line normally at like the top third or bottom third of the canvas instead of running right down the middle. And then I'm going to loosely sketch in where everything is going to go. And nothing is extremely precise or detailed at this point. Just getting a general indication of where everything is at. paint in that stream area a little bit here. All right, and that is literally all I need in order to get started painting. Nothing is very detailed, it's pretty loose at this point, and that is all right. So the very first thing that I need to do is start blocking everything in. And what I mean by that is I want everything on my canvas to be covered in paint, to just get rid of the intimidation of the white canvas, have it all covered, and I'm looking for basically big value shapes. So looking for the general value of this tree, its general color, its general value, and not worrying about all the details, this mountain range, so on and so forth. So one thing we talk about in painting class is atmospheric perspective, which means basically that the atmosphere is affecting the perspective of the piece, in that when we look at trees that are further away from us, they appear much more gray in color and also lighter in value. So they will not be as dark as trees that are up close to us. So these trees right here are much darker than these trees back over here, which you can tell when you look at the image. They also have much more chroma. They are much more vibrant. The colors they have higher intensity than these trees back in here. And one little way that I like to show this is if I were to grab these transparencies and start laying one transparency, two transparency, and the third one on there, and so forth. Do you see how our values have gotten lighter each time? The trees have gotten lighter, and also the color is not nearly as intense because of the effect of what's happening with each transparency we're laying down. Well, the same thing happens with atmosphere. When you're outside and you're driving through Kansas and you're looking at the beautiful landscape and field after field, pasture after pasture, you will notice that the trees that are closest to us are going to be much darker in value than the trees that are far away. And they're going to have a lot more color close to us. So I want to make sure that I am painting in that illusion as I work. The very first value that I want to paint down on my canvas is the darkest value. So if I put down the darkest area first in my painting, then I have something very just matter of fact to compare the rest of my values to. I know then that, hey, this was practically black. This is my darkest value. And so I know that everything else, when I compare it to that, should either be basically lighter. And how much lighter? So I'm going to always compare it back to that dark value. So I am mixing my ultramarine blue, alizarin crimson, which gives me almost a black mixture by mixing these two. And I will put a little bit of my red in there as well. And students are usually shocked that I don't have red on my palette, or black, sorry, that I don't have black on my palette. And I never actually do paint with black because black tends to deaden a lot of the color. It's kind of like a wall. A lot of times it dries very matte, and I can allow for a much more greater depth if I rather mix a couple colors to try and reach nearly a dark value, but without using black straight out of the tube. So I'm going to go ahead and paint this in first, where I have my darkest value. And notice that it is super dark, even though this isn't black right out of the tube. At this point, I'm going to start blocking in everything else. So I'm going to actually jump back and start painting in my trees. So blue and yellow for my green mixture, knowing that I need plenty of blue in there because this is a really dark value. I'm actually going to grab a little bit of red in there. So red is the complement to green on the color wheel, and it will help neutralize it a little bit. Since these trees are further in the distance, it's actually going to be a little bit more neutral than if I had a tree right up here in the immediate foreground. So I'm going to take this green, and I'm going to start kind of just painting in where this tree is here. And I'm not trying to be super detailed or super precise. I'm just trying to get the basic value shapes in. And I'm also working very thin at this point. So later on I can go back and I can paint over top everything, but it's much better to work thin to thick than start out thick and then realize, oh, I have the wrong color here and I'm going to start painting over top, and then my painting just gets thicker and thicker and thicker, which is exactly what I did as a beginner with painting, and it was a huge headache. So you really want to just start out thin and then work your way to the thicker paint. Now I'm going to go ahead and paint in my mountain range. So I'm using my palette knife again to mix this color, and I'm going to start with blue. And I'm going to add a little bit of white to this. And a little bit of red to this mixture, since this mountain is leaning towards a little bit of a violet type mixture. And actually I'm going to grab a little bit of yellow too. May have overdone that a little bit on the yellow. Because acrylic dries really quickly, it is really very forgiving. So a lot of artists that'll work in watercolor get very frustrated starting out, because watercolor is very transparent, and basically what you put down, you're not going to completely change painting over top of it. Acrylic, on the other hand, it dries very quickly. If you paint something in wrong, you can go back and paint over top of it and fix your mistakes. Oil painting is also extremely forgiving. It just takes a little bit longer to dry. So it kind of depends on what your working, preferences as far as medium. I love both. I actually hated acrylic for the longest time. Most of my years as a student, I hated acrylic. And later on, I learned to really appreciate it and really like working in it. Oil, I will say, is probably my first love as a whole. It's just, I've spent many, many years working in oil, and I love working in oil. But I also love switching it up. I love pushing myself sometimes in mediums that aren't necessarily my favorite. It's really, really good for artists to do that. And through doing that is how really I came to actually like working in acrylic as much as I have. Now I'm going to go over here and I'm going to start painting in kind of this mountain range. So again, nothing is looking clean. Everything looks really messy. Totally fine. I actually personally kind of love it how raw paintings start out, and then later on when they start coming together, it's just really exciting seeing that step by step. And usually viewers, when they're watching you work, they might comment as far as, I had no idea where you're going with this, or I was worried about what was going to happen, but this really came together. And that always cracks me up, because I just know that that's how it goes as an artist when you're working. They always start out looking kind of raw. So now I'm going to let that dry for a little bit, and I'm going to keep moving around. So I'm going to start painting in the sky at this point. I'm going to grab some white first because my sky is actually a very light in value. And then I'm going to mix in a little bit of blue with this. When you paint the sky, it is lightest in value close to the horizon, and it gets darker as it goes up. The other thing is that the sky, when it's closer to the horizon, it actually is warmer in hue. And so I'm going to mix a tiny bit of yellow in with this mixture. Now, if I put too much yellow in here, I'm going to push this sky to be very green, which is what I don't want. I don't want this to look like a storm is brewing. I just want to warm it a little bit. Okay, now we're going to start bouncing around to everything else. So this is pretty much dry. I'm going to go in here. Notice how there's like the lighter value hitting the tops of these trees. So when we're looking at this scene, it's really important to notice where the light is coming from. A lot of this foreground area is in shadow, basically because we have kind of a mountain range over here that's blocking some of the light from hitting this. But these trees are catching some light down the right side of them, and then these trees back in here are also getting some light as well. So I am going to go ahead and start painting that in. I'm noticing that on the camera, everything appears to be reversed from my side. What I see, it's reversed on the camera. So when I say right and left, I guess that's probably not being interpreted correctly unless I can figure out how to flip that later on the recording. It's looking really messy. It's all right. Okay, I'm going to start painting in some grass now. So I'm going to grab my palette knife. Blue, white, yellow. I want to neutralize this color again. I'm going to add a little bit of red to it. Seems like maybe the chroma is just a little bit intense. And you'll notice when you look at this, there's quite a few different shades of green in the grass. It's not just the same color of green clear across. We have areas that have more yellow in them, areas that have more orange, some of the areas have more red. Some will have more blue, violets, all these different things, but I'm just kind of trying to get a general large body of grass covered all at one point right now, and then later I can go back and start putting more detail and more variety in the grasses. Indicate a little bit of that right now. And this would be kind of what's considered a wash. So because I'm working so thin, it's basically like I'm just applying a wash of color on here, almost like I'm working in watercolor, actually. best to always mix those colors with the palette knife instead of the paintbrush. But if we're going to be honest here, I have been known for being guilty of breaking that rule occasionally. It is hard on your brushes, mixing with your brush. And now I'm going to work at painting in the water. I'm just getting a block in over that too, so I'm going to grab blue, white, a little bit of red, a little bit too much red in there in my opinion. Leaning a little bit much towards the violet. Scale that back a little bit. So always while I'm working, I'm always again comparing my values. So does this need to go darker? Does this need to go lighter? I'm also thinking about intensity. Does this need to be muted? Does it need to be pulled back? Great. Does it need to be more intense? And I'm always comparing back and forth, thinking about, is this correct? Is it working right? Is it reading right? Or do I need to change this? Not really getting into any extreme details right now, but I am kind of trying to get some of the value correct and even apply a little bit of the movement of the water. I'm going to mix a color for some of this bank that's showing along here. So this is actually leaning towards a violet color. So I got my blue, alizarin crimson, and a little bit of yellow ochre in there as well. Just kind of start indicating where that's at. All right, so at this point, I would say that I have an entire block in. Nothing looks good right now, but my canvas at least is pretty much covered, except for just a couple little spotty areas here and there where the canvas is showing through. So it's not gorgeous, but at least I have a really good indication of my values, where the shapes are, my drawing, and now I can start building on this. This is my foundation to paint on top of. And a lot of this has kind of started to dry already, so it's really easy for me to go in now and start working on top of what I have already laid down. And some of my values can be pushed even darker. So like right now I'm noticing Some of the areas in my grasses, like the wash is really thin, so I need to build that up some more to make sure that I'm capturing the values correctly. So what I'm going to do first, actually, is I'm going to bounce back kind of in this area and clean up my background a little bit. Grab a new paper towel. And some of these colors have already dried on my palette, so I have to kind of remix some of them. One thing that's really important to me as an artist when I work is not so much that I want my painting to look exactly photorealistic, because to me, we have wonderful photographers out there that can capture a beautiful scene. And if it's my goal to just recreate what a photographer has already captured in a photograph or what I've already captured in this photograph, then I'm really selling myself short as far as my artist voice and using it to its full capacity. So when I work, I want to capture the essence of the mood behind this. What I remember experiencing for me when I was actually at this location. What it felt like when, you know, the warm sun is beating down on you and you're up in the mountains, the nice cool breeze as it's getting closer to dusk and everything's starting to cool down and the shadows are long and the birds are chirping and it's just gorgeous. That's what I am wanting to capture, is the mood behind that, to where that someone can look at that and feel what that would be like to be there at that location. And so am I using variety in my edges? Am I using my artistic license in some of the colors to push a certain mood and atmosphere in my work? That is my goal. And so it's not so much just to create something that looks like it was taken on a camera, just a straight up photograph, but that I'm using my voice and my creativity to interpret the scene how I want it to be interpreted. Kind of along those lines too, one thing that I will talk about in my classes is the message behind a piece of art. And every piece of artwork carries a message. And every artist will have a humanistic worldview or a Christ-centered worldview. And how they communicate in their artwork is a reflection of that. And so for me as a Christian, it's always my hope when I paint that my artwork would honor God. And so for a painting like this, I am capturing the beauty of his creation, and I would hope that this brings joy to the viewer when they look at this, that it brings them peace, good memories, maybe of a trip they've taken, a place they've been, of people they love. That's what I would hope. So I'm going to jump over here and work on trees again. I'm going to try and kind of clean them up a little bit. sometimes as I work, it's a back and forth thing. So like right now I'm working on the trees, but it might mean that I go back with my sky and clean up some area around the trees or the mountains around the trees later, which I probably will have to do. So these trees are pushed back a little bit further in the distance, not quite as vibrant. They're grayed a little bit more, a little bit of a lighter value. Go in here and indicate where some of the light is, hitting these. Okay, so this area is starting to look a little bit more like trees, indication of them at least. One thing that's really important whenever working on a painting is deciding kind of what you want the focal point to be. What is this painting about? Is it about, if it's a portrait or if it's a landscape with a figure in it, the figure tends to always command attention. That pretty much automatically becomes the focal point. But if there's no figure, animal, or anything like that in a scene, then what? And it's the artist's job to determine how they want you to view the scene. So for me, when I'm working on this, I want the focal point to kind of be about the stream and maybe like these trees right here. So like this is kind of the focal point right in through there. And the stream will nicely bring the eye back in that direction. So artists will make use of line when they work. It might be a path. It might be, in this case, like a stream. Sometimes it's much more subtle. Sometimes it's not so much a direct actual line, but it's more of an implied line. Like even the gaze of a figure in a painting, the direction that they're looking can become a line because it's leading the viewer's eye to a certain spot. But it's really important to have a focal point, and everything else should basically support the focal point. So it shouldn't detract from it. It should be very obvious where the artist wants you to look and what is most important in the scene, but nothing else should feel like it's boring or unfinished. It should still be interesting to look at and lead your eye around the painting. So I'm just kind of giving the indication of where the light is hitting each of these trees. Now, I'm going to leave all of that for now and jump into this foreground area and just bring it to a little bit more of a refined completion stage. So I'm going to mix up a bunch of green. One thing that's interesting is that we as humans, we all see color a little bit differently. So one person may see color a little bit more vibrant than another, but value will never change. As far as lights and darks, that will never change. And if your values are incorrect in a piece, nothing will feel right. And this will really show up to be true if you're doing like a portrait or something like that. If you have values that are too dark or too light in the wrong place, it can really start making facial features feel distorted. You probably notice I haven't actually switched out brushes this whole time. I've been using this medium-sized brush, which I'm actually going to grab my larger one for some of this grass. So normally when I'm doing a demonstration like this, the students present, I'm asked a bunch of questions. Since I don't have anyone here asking me questions, try and make sure that I don't give you too much dead space. And share with you a little bit about myself. So I started working here at Central fall of 2017. I was working then as actually as an adjunct instructor and working in the admissions office. And then the next year was my full-time year here as an instructor. I love it. So I grew up in Kansas, Marion, Kansas area. My parents are farmers. And I have 7 siblings, or there's 7 of us, I have 6 siblings. I've always loved art, so from the time I really can remember, I've just loved creating. And I didn't really know that I was good at it, I guess, until elementary school, and that was basically because I had classmates that pointed it out, like, oh, ask Amy to do that. Amy, can you help me with this? You're good at drawing. And that was the first time that I really realized, okay, I guess not everybody likes this, or not everyone is equal in their skill in this. And that was kind of when I first, I guess, caught on to that. But I always loved drawing. That was kind of my primary thing. I would paint with my watercolor colors along with Bob Ross when I was a kid, which is kind of funny. But I didn't really start thriving, I guess, in the arts until high school. And my high school art teacher just really encouraged us to experiment a lot. And it was kind of during that time that I just got braver and tried different media, and really knew that this is something that I want to do for life, but I wasn't quite sure what it was that I wanted to do with art. And I think that's something that a lot of young artists do struggle with. They don't know for sure what you can do with art. And I think even sometimes parents struggle with this a little bit, because we've all heard the phrase starving artists. And, you know, when you're sending your kid off to college, you want to think that you're sending them in a field that's going to serve them well, and that they'll have opportunities in and find a good job. Anyway, so when I went away to college, my thoughts is that I wanted to be a high school art teacher. I went to a public school growing up, and I thought, you know, if I could get into teaching in a public school as a Christian, I would have an opportunity to be a testimony there and share some light and love of Jesus in the classroom. And so that's kind of what I wanted to do. And then college, I learned that I just loved painting so much, which didn't come right away. Like I said, I love drawing. Oil painting, I actually hated starting out. And I kept pushing myself in it because I'm stubborn and I wanted to get good at it. And all my classmates seemed to love it. And I couldn't figure out why, for me, it seemed to be such a challenge, but it was. And I actually liked watercolor best when it came to painting in those early years. But eventually, I grew to really love oil painting. And after I finished my undergrad, I didn't feel quite ready to jump out there and make a go of it. So I decided, you know what, I'm going to go on to grad school and I want to learn more about how to paint and how to be a good artist, and learn more about being a professional in this field. And so that's what I did. And while I was in grad school, I began working, doing illustration work. It was still a digital illustration. And then after I finished grad school, I kept doing that. Loved it. It was basically for school curriculum and making school curriculum appear interesting for kids and young adults, and trying to make textbooks fun. And I did enjoy that, but I knew it wasn't something that I wanted to do necessarily the rest of my life. So outside of working in the office, I began marketing my art and working on that full-time, painting. I picked up a great gallery out in Scottsdale, Arizona, and also one in Billings, Montana, and started cranking out landscape paintings, a lot of them actually, and some narrative paintings and of other subject matter as well. A lot of it's kind of the Western landscape. So I grew up, in the Midwest in Kansas and on a farm. So a lot of what I love painting is what I'm familiar with. So it might be, children shoring farm animals, or, a mother-daughter doing something on the farm, that type of thing. That's kind of what I really enjoy. Love that. Also work doing a number of different commission type things as an artist, graphic design, freelance work. I did rifle engraving designs for a while. I didn't do the engraving, but I did do the design work for it, and that was all digital. That was a lot of fun. I worked at a great gallery in assistant sales position. Got to learn a lot about the business side of art in doing that, and kind of what galleries are looking for and what's healthy in that type of relationship and all that good stuff, which was wonderful. And then into 2016, I moved to Kansas to be close by family. And I heard about a great opportunity here at Central Teaching, and I took it. And I've loved it ever since. It's been wonderful. It's been a lot of fun sharing my passion with students, watching them learn, watching them grow, sharing what I'm passionate about every day. It's really enjoyable. And then, of course, painting whenever I get the chance outside of that is also a treat. There's just a lot of variation in these grasses, a lot of warmer areas and cooler areas. I'm trying to capture some of that. Probably my most exciting painting trip that I've ever done, bringing my paints along, was actually summer of last year, which would have been summer of 2019. I got to go to Israel with the college, and I brought my paints along. So it was acrylic. I did not bring my oils, because then you have to deal with paint thinner and all that, and with flights. That's not so easy dealing with. So I brought acrylics, and I also brought gouache. Gouache is a lot of fun, something that I feel like most people don't know exists. Of course, artists do, they know about gouache, but it's a lot of fun. It's similar to acrylic, except it has qualities that are near to watercolor. So it can be very transparent, and it also can kind of lift off. So whereas acrylic dries almost like plastic when it dries, gouache, if you wet it, will actually can run or lift back up off the canvas pretty well. It's a little bit unique. Favorite method of painting is definitely painting on site. So when I go painting outside, like when I went on this little trip and took my paints with me and painted outdoors, it's called plein air. It's a French term that refers to painting in the open air. Something again that did not come naturally. I didn't enjoy it for many, many years, and many artists absolutely love it. And so I kept pushing myself to try and catch on to this. Just technique of being able to capture what's in front of you outside, which is such a challenge because the lighting changes. When I'm sitting here and I'm working from a photograph, this is a stationary image. It's not going to change. It's frozen in time. And so it presents a lot less challenges than painting in person and having lighting change in front of you. Weather can drastically change. Clouds can roll in, change all the lighting, the mood, everything. You can deal with people stopping and talking to you. That in of itself can be a challenge. The distraction of that. Animals. When I painted out west, it was sometimes buffalo. You'd have to pack up and get out of there because the buffalo all of a sudden would be nearby, or bison. And it's just tougher. It's a lot harder. So when you're painting in person too, you're dealing with all this beauty all the way around you. And you have to focus on what it is that you're really wanting to capture, because you can't capture everything in front of you. There's just absolutely no way. So you have to be very intentional about what it is that you're wanting to capture and paint. And you have to remember kind of what it is that initially spoke to you, like right when you got on the scene. Because sometimes, like I said, as the lighting will change and different things, your scene may be completely different, 15 minutes than what it was when you got there. And so it's really important that you have a clear idea before starting. All right, this is what I want this painting to be about. This is what I'm trying to capture. This is what I want to say. And so for a beginning artist, sometimes that can be really challenging. It's just taking all of that in and then capturing it on canvas well. And so there was a particular summer that I challenged myself that I was going to do 5 paintings from life every week for 8 weeks. So that right there was 40 paintings. And then I was doing studio paintings on top of that for an art show I had coming up. And so in a matter of like, I want to say maybe 12 weeks, I did over 80 paintings, which was a lot. And I learned a lot doing it. It was really good for me. It stretched me terribly much, but it was really, really good for me. It also burnt me out a little bit. After that, I didn't want to go out and paint for a few weeks. I kind of needed a break from it, but it was really good for me, a really great educational experience. So I definitely encourage artists who are wanting to learn anything new to just be brave and to go for it. And, not to be intimidated by trying something new. If it's something that you've always wanted to do, you'll never know unless you try. You just never will. And kind of along those lines, I always love talking about the gift of creativity, just in general. So a lot of times I'll get asked, like, do you believe every person is gifted with some creativity, or do you think that to be artistic is a special gift, like it's something you're born with, or is it something that can be learned? So there's a few things I guess I have as thoughts on that. And I personally believe that we've all been gifted with some type of creativity. So if we look back in Genesis, the very first book in the Bible, the very first verse, God says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. So the very first thing that God chose to tell us about himself is that he is creative. And he could have told us that he's loving, that he's pure, that he's holy, that he's good, that he's just, all these things he could have said, and they're all true, and he's so much more than that. But the very first thing God wanted us to know about himself is that he's creative. And I love that. And in Genesis, it also says that we have been created in his image. And so in order to be created in God's image, it means that we have been gifted also with creativity. And I think a lot of people really stumble on that because they think, well, I'm not a painter. I can't even draw a stick figure. I can't tell you how many thousands of times I've heard that line. But I really believe that we have all been gifted with some type of creativity. And it may not be painting, it may not be drawing, but perhaps it's in the way you communicate. Maybe you have a really strong gift for words, and maybe it's being able to teach somebody else. Maybe your creativity is in how you problem solve. And even like as an athlete, you can be creative on the field or on the court. Maybe it is creativity in organization, or maybe it's creativity in design as far as decorating a beautiful home, picking out beautiful colors and putting things together well. There's so many areas that creativity is a part of our lives, and a lot of times I think we just take it for granted. So I really do believe that we've all been gifted with some creativity. Now, as far as can art be learned, or is it, born into you? Any skill can be improved with time and effort. So I'm not an athlete, but if I wanted to go out and, learn how to play basketball better than what I am now, well, I'm going to have to put in a lot of practice and a lot of hours and training to be better than what I am, which is not very good. But with time and effort, no doubt, I would get better at it. But I also think that we are born with specific passions and kind of our calling in life, and how we use and fulfill the talents that we've been given and cultivating those things, I think makes a huge difference. So for me, I'm very passionate about art. I love what I do. I love creating. I love looking at beautiful things and sharing beautiful things with others. It's something I'm very passionate about. And so how could I not help but get better at something that I already enjoy and love? So I think there's a number of different thoughts that can go into that. noodling it at this point. I could go ahead and add quite a few more details in if I wanted to. A lot of times what I like doing with my paintings actually is stepping away from them for a couple days, and then, or at least a night, and then coming back and looking at it with fresh eyes again. So I'm going to stop here just real soon. And this isn't what I would consider necessarily exactly a complete painting, but it has all the main information here, and I could return to it later and easily pick up where I left off and just clean up some things a little bit better, add in some more detail, soften some edges, harden some other edges, add a little bit more variation into the grass with colors, go back and work on my trees, make them a little bit more pristine. But for time's sake here, I think we're about ready to call it good. All right, so let me see if I can maybe position my camera a little bit closer and give you a better look. Okay, so this would not be a finished painting, but at least at this point, I kind of have my values locked in. I have all my colors in there. It's starting to show form. And I could go back later and kind of clean up some different areas. So some of the areas with the grass up front, I would go back in and refine a little bit. Maybe with my rocks, refine that a little bit more. My trees, I could go back in there and clean that up a little bit. But I feel like I could step away from this and feel good about it and continue on it later. So thank you so very much for allowing me to chat with you a little bit about acrylic painting and show you my work process. And if you have any questions, I would love to hear from you. I'd love to have you sit in on a class and observe. And I look forward to talking with you again in the future. Thank you so much.